Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. We're at the Kellogg Center at Michigan State University, where later we're going to talk to author and journalist Evan Thomas, who on Monday spoke at the Governor Jim Blanchard Public Service Forum, but right now the man behind the forum, former Michigan Governor and Congressman James Blanchard. Welcome to the show, Governor.
Thank you, Burl.
I want to talk to you mostly about politics, but first I'd like to know more about the forum. What was the impetus for it?
Well, I've been a big Spartan all my life, 2 degrees here, loved every minute of it. And I wanted to do something other than simply send money to the athletic programs, which I've done, football and basketball. I wanted to do something on the academic side as well. And so we created this Jim Blanchard Public Service Forum to bring in on a regular basis speakers, diplomats, public officials, politicians, and I also added to that authors and journalists to highlight public service, to talk about the importance of public service, to help inspire students to want to engage in public service. And that's the reason. And that's why we have Evan today, one of the leading authors who's written about presidents and movements and so many other things. And it's worked out really well.
That's great, and of course, a very apropos speaker this year because we're on the, looking at an election on Tuesday that's supremely important. Tell me, if you will, the mantra of this election for a lot of people seems to be we've got 2 flawed candidates. Do you look at it that way?
No, I don't. First of all, anyone who runs for president, almost any great person, has some flaws. But no, I've never seen, and I've worked on presidential elections my whole life. And I handed leaflets out in 1952, all right? But as an adult, worked on all the campaigns since 1972. I have never seen such a disparity in talent. Rarely have we had someone with the experience and the achievements of a Hillary Clinton. And rarely have we had someone with so little credentials for public service than Donald Trump. It's really staggering to see the difference. Hillary's devoted her life to public service. It isn't just the titles of being First Lady or Senator or Secretary of State. It's the achievements. It's working for children and families and healthcare, or here in Michigan supporting the auto industry. With Donald, it's all about Donald, and I hate to dwell on it, but there is a dramatic difference in their qualifications. And sure, Hillary has made mistakes. We all do. Every great leader has flaws.
Why do you
so I don't see it as for people that say a lesser of evils. I say we have a wonderful opportunity to elect someone who's uniquely qualified to be a great president, and Hillary Clinton.
What is it this year that you think led to the nomination of Donald Trump?
I think it's been several decades of the it's kind of the Tea Party type voter that's very anti-government, tends to want to believe in conspiracies and mythology, whether it's that Barack Obama was born in Africa or vaccinations cause autism or these goofy things, that there are simple solutions. I mentioned to someone earlier, it's a group of people that claim they love their country but they hate their government. Well, think about that. You know, our American system is something we should be proud of. It was the first of its kind in history. And if you don't like your government, you should fix it, improve it, and not try to go to Washington to tear it down, to shut it down, which has been. So I think, I'm afraid a lot of the Republicans enabled these people. Nativism, some of it's racism, some of it's just know-nothingism. They've enabled them, they've used them telling him that the Second Amendment will be abolished if Hillary wins. Of course, that's not true. They've enabled them in order to get power, in order to win elections, and all of a sudden this Frankenstein monster that they've kept in the closet has come out now and chased them all away and knocked out all their other, many of whom were worthy candidates. I mean, you think about the fact that Donald Trump beat all those people in primaries who have devoted their lives, many of them, to public service and to our country.
Well, a lot of people are concerned that if Trump loses, that's really not the end of Trumpism. What do you think?
Won't be the end of Trumpism or of the nativism, of the negativism. It's hard to say what will happen. We don't know, although that's a luxury I hope we have, which is he loses and Hillary wins. The most important thing will be for Hillary to figure out how to work with Congress, how to begin to repair the damage that's been inflicted upon her, mostly inflicted upon her, although some of it's self-inflicted, and try to unify the country. And I think, I happen to know her pretty well, that I think she'll work quite well with the U.S. Senate. The Republicans in the Senate, many of them enjoyed working with her. The House will be more difficult. But the big challenge will be try to figure out how to connect with the American people on the fact that she is uniquely capable of leading us into the future and that she wants to be president for everyone. And that's why her theme, "We're Stronger Together," is so important.
We've seen Secretary Clinton pushed to the left this year by the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, which in its own way resonated greatly. Do you see her continuing along that road more to the more progressive side? The Clintons are known as centrist Democrats.
Yeah, well, of course, centrist Democrat today is somewhat left of center of the American people. The Democratic Party is more left of center than it has been, just as the Republican Party is much more right of center, almost to the point of being, with the Trump people, anarchistic. Yeah, I don't see, I think that if we're fortunate enough to have Hillary as president, and people have to get out and vote, I see her trying to implement the platform, although mostly people disregard platforms after they've won. I see her wanting to try to implement that and having the support of a lot of the Sanders people, including Bernie Sanders. Some of it can be pretty mainstream. Trying to figure out how to deal with massive student debt, make tuition free at public universities, something I've supported for a long time. Or having a major infrastructure program. These things, I think, could be very mainstream, and if done right, could draw Republican support. I do.
Now, Obamacare has taken a hit because some people have gotten big rate increases or are facing them. Do you see the impetus, if she wins, for this moving toward the plan of Medicare for all?
I do. I happen to think we should have Medicare for all. And I note that one of Hillary's positions is to drop the age of people becoming eligible for Medicare from 65 to 50. Ted Kennedy, who, along with a lot of all the rest of us, supported a single-payer system years ago. It didn't go anywhere because of the power of insurance companies and the fact that our society is just much more complicated than a society 1/10 our size like Canada. But one way to do it is to apply Medicare to everybody. All the doctors I have love Medicare, and it pays. The big issue will be financing it, really, is finding a way to fund it without breaking the bank. It isn't the concept, because it's worked pretty well.
And we're perhaps the only Western nation that doesn't have a single-payer system. What is it, you think, about Americans that they're so reluctant to do that?
Part of it's the mythology that it's not popular in other countries. By the way, in Canada, the healthcare system is very popular. No politician dares talk about changing it. But they have some problems. Their system is the second most expensive in the world after ours. And they do poach on our system. A lot of Canadians with money will have their surgeries in Arizona or Florida. So their system isn't perfect, but for the average person in Canada, it works really well. You know, here it's really a matter of trying to cover people that don't have health care, and then trying to figure out how to rein in the costs. You know, we have very sophisticated medicine here, but not everybody needs a sophisticated operation. You know, we need to talk about daily care, preventive care at an affordable cost. There's got to be a way to do it, but I think it's harder in our society just because we're so big, we're so huge, we're so complicated. My guess is if you have a single-payer system here like Medicare, you probably need a role of the states to help administer it, probably just to make sure where there's a problem, it gets isolated. It doesn't become a national problem. Although I must say Medicare and Social Security work really, really well. The whole issue is financing it.
Let's turn, if we could, to Michigan politics. After this election, the next big one in Michigan is going to be the governor's race. Is the pendulum swinging?
I think so, yeah. Usually after 8 years, the party out of power regains the governor's office. And we have several really good candidates. One right here in the Lansing area, Gretchen Whitmer. You have Congressman Dan Kildee from Flint. There may be others. The mayor of Detroit is doing really well, although he would eschew any talk of running for governor. But so I think the big issue will be, can we get a legislature that wants to work with the governor? Even Governor Snyder has had somewhat of a hostile legislature. They are kind of a Tea Party legislature. And they've done some good things, but they've done some goofy things. So we need, one of the problems we have is term limits here. Members of the legislature do not have to live with the consequences of what they do. They don't establish relationships with each other, relationships of trust. They're always worrying about the next office they're going to run for because they're term limited. Oftentimes they go home and run for county commissioner against their own supporters. So it breeds hostility, and it's just tragic that they don't have to live with the consequences of what they do, and they're viewing everyone as a potential competitor.
And if we see a few Democrats win seats in the House this year, what's your hope? Do you think it's realistic to see the legislature itself?
I hope so. I hope we at least, well, the only group that's on the ballot is the House. I hope the Democrats regain control of the House. It would probably be narrowly. They will have to work with Republicans. But I think that would be really important.
Down the road, could you see the legislature swinging back to the Democratic side?
Yes, I do. Although, again, the way the seats are drawn, it's harder. Apportionment is a problem everywhere for U.S. Congress and at the state level, and it's a problem here. But I think there could be enough Democratic firepower in 2 years to be able to move our state forward in a way that I think would represent everyone in the state and not very narrow interests.
All right, well, Governor Blanchard, thank you so much for being on City Pulse.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Okay. And joining us now is the man who did speak to the Governor Jim Blanchard Public Service Forum, author and journalist Evan Thomas. Welcome.
Earl, good to see you here.
And you are the author of a great book that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but I want to talk to you, and this is the Saturday before finally the general election. Have you ever seen anything like this one?
No, because we've never seen anything like Donald Trump. I mean, he's a first. I'm tempted to hope that he's the last of this type who's driven more by anger and ego than anything else. I mean, I don't want to diminish his candidacy in the sense that he's appealing to something that's real. There are a lot of unhappy people out there who feel disaffected and left behind by the elites and the establishment, and somebody should speak for them. So I don't denigrate his followers, but Trump himself is a dangerous guy.
A lot of people think if Trump were less Trump, he would be winning right now.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the Democrats are lucky to be running against a guy who appears to be unstable, because Trump has tapped into something that's real and big. And this disaffection, this dissatisfaction, this feeling that there are two Americas, that they're the insiders in Washington who kind of control things, and there's everybody else, that's a powerful feeling. And if a smarter, more clever, more responsible candidate had tapped into that, I think Hillary Clinton would be vulnerable. I think she's going to win. You never know for sure. But I think if Trump hadn't self-destructed in a lot of ways, he was riding a movement that is powerful.
As we record this show on a Monday before two Tuesdays before the election, James Comey's taking a lot of heat. Do you see both sides of that one?
I think Comey's a straight shooter. I mean, his role as head of the FBI is just the facts. I'm not political. I'm trying to play it straight. And now maybe he's playing it a little bit too straight. Even FBI directors have egos, and maybe he's showing off a little bit that look how pure I can be. It is disruptive what he's doing, and I know the Justice Department was not happy that did he really have to send this letter to Congress? Did he really have to do that? Couldn't he have waited? But I think Comey's view is no. I'm the law, and the law has to be served, and politics and all that's irrelevant to that. That's a noble vision of his job. If I was Hillary, it would drive me nuts, but it is a noble vision, and it's in keeping, really, with American tradition, where the lawmakers, where the politicians are over here and the law's over here, and there is some distance, and that, in the long run, is a good thing.
And I know as a journalist, this is great, the story keeps going,
Yeah.
But how do you feel, do you miss being out covering this one?
Sure, of course. I mean, I was a kid when I started doing this, and it's very exciting. I can remember my first time in the Wayfarer bar at the New Hampshire primaries, with the other journalists, and it's a thrill to be on the campaign plane and to be out there. But I'm 65, I've done that, and it's in a different role now, but it's still exciting.
I want to turn to your book. This is a rich character study of a fascinating man, but I think you've captured him in a way that I've not seen before. You've humanized him.
I tried. I mean, I think Nixon's been made into a cartoon. Most people know him as a kind of ridiculous figure doing that. And he's not. He was a deep, substantive guy. I mean, he was a deeply well-read president. He thought hard about international relations. I mean, he's the guy who opened up China. Some of your viewers will remember that. And he was a very good politician in a lot of ways. I mean, he understood power. And he understood how to get things done. His administration got a lot done, including creating the EPA and environmental laws and even social welfare legislation as a Republican. So and this is important for today, he's a Republican president who worked with a Democratic Congress to get things done. Doesn't happen so much today. So Nixon did some things, but his character was flawed. And he was lonely and kind of an introvert, very odd. Politics is an extrovert's profession. He was an introvert. And he used that to his good effect in some ways. It made him watchful and wary, but it ultimately destroyed him. His fearfulness, some would say even his paranoia. He thought he had enemies everywhere. He did have a lot of enemies. He did. He wasn't making them up, but he exaggerated them. And that kind of fearfulness, in the end, well, it is a tragedy. He did a lot of good things, but he destroyed himself.
He must have been deeply insecure. When I read about what was going on with him during the Checkers episode, where he was being attacked for having this secret campaign fund, he practically gave up, and it sounds like if it hadn't been for his wife, Pat, he would have.
It's important to have a good spouse. And Pat is an unsung hero, actually, of my book. She really did stand by her man and gave him strength. But he had deep vulnerabilities. I mean, the Checkers speech, which a few of your viewers will remember, he was in an unfair place. The press was making a big deal out of a slush fund that really wasn't that big a deal. Actually, Adlai Stevenson, his opponent, had a bigger one. But he felt left, abandoned, lost, put upon, and his wife had to buck him up and say, you got to keep going here. She did, he did. His Checkers speech was one of the first really great acts of television theater in politics. This is 1952. He went to the people, he went over the heads of the politicians. He gave kind of a mawkish speech, but a very effective speech. It worked. Eisenhower kept him on the ticket. He was Eisenhower's vice president for 8 years and then ran for president, loses to Kennedy. You know, people remember that, the Kennedy-Nixon debates. But one thing about Nixon, he was insecure, but he was a fighter. And even when he was down and out, he came back. Lost governorship in 1962 in California, but he fought back, wins in 68, wins in 72, and then he destroys himself.
And I think there are things about him that would fit in this year because, you know, the silent majority was the slogan that his campaign
He made it up. Richard Nixon made up that expression, the silent majority, which Trump has appropriated. Nixon was very skillful at recognizing, partly because Nixon himself was insecure and felt cut out by the establishment. Nixon, as a U.S. Senator, as a vice president, felt that the Georgetown crowd, the insiders, all life is like high school. The cool kids in the cafeteria were against him, that he was an outsider. Because he felt like an outsider, he was sympathetic with other outsiders. And he was able to tap into this feeling out in the land that the elites were in it for themselves and not helping the little man. And Nixon could tap into that feeling. And he knew during the Vietnam War, for instance, the kids were demonstrating and the cities were burning, but there was a great silent majority that believed in the country, that didn't like all the noise and protest. He was on their side. That worked. In 1972, he beat George McGovern. Remember George McGovern? In one of the great landslides in history. Nixon won every state but one by tapping into that silent majority, just as Trump is trying to do now. Just Nixon was more effective about it.
You tell a story at the end of your book about meeting Richard Nixon. If you could tell that story.
Well, it's classic Nixon because Nixon was shy and awkward, but he was very well prepared. He compensated for his shyness by doing his homework. And I was working for Newsweek, and Nixon was on one of his rehabilitation tours trying to get his reputation back up. But this is in the late 1980s, and there was maybe 40 people there. Nixon comes by, gives a 10-minute speech, and then comes right over to me and says, picks me out of a crowd and says, "Your grandfather," he said, "was a great man." I'm going, "What? How does he even know who I am?" He got in the guest list. My grandfather was Norman Thomas, who ran for president 6 times as a socialist in the 30s and 40s. And Nixon had gotten himself the guest list and seen my name and done some research and flattered me by knowing who I was. People love that. I was flattered by Richard Nixon. And of course, I remember that. And I was impressed that even though he's shy and weird and awkward, by doing your homework and being thoughtful and being considerate, you can compensate for a lot. The great politicians do that.
Now I'm going to insert my Norman Thomas story here, which we did a radio interview, so you know what's coming. But when I was a freshman in college, I went to hear your grandfather speak, and I was at an Eastern school, but fresh from Toledo, Ohio, and it never occurred to me there could be something wrong about the war in Vietnam. No one ever talked about it. And then I sat in that lecture hall on a Sunday afternoon and watched this little old man with white hair being led up to the lectern because he was blind, I found out. And then suddenly he sprang to life, and he made me understand why you should question this war. Tell me about your grandfather.
Well, he was a questioner, and that was a great quality. He did not accept received wisdom. He wanted to question, and he was often on the side of people, actually like Nixon, but from a totally different political perspective, who'd been left out. My grandfather was early in the civil rights movement. He was standing behind Dr. King when he gave his famous speech, 1963, the "We Shall Overcome" speech. My grandfather was right there with him. So he was unpopular in a lot of ways because he would espouse unpopular causes. Socialist Party was not a popular thing when he ran. Bernie Sanders had made it a little bit more popular. But my grandfather was on the side of people who were forgotten, who'd been left out. And he really believed in that. He came from a Christian background. His father had been a small-town preacher. Norman Thomas actually had been ordained as a Presbyterian minister. World War I, he left the church because he thought the church was pro-war. He was anti-war. He became a socialist instead and tried to stand on the side of people who were being left behind. He was a national figure. He was not an effective politician. He would get beaten badly in national elections. But he spoke for people who didn't have a voice, and for that he'll be remembered.
What is it about this country? So many people, of course, accept government benefits, and another name for that is socialism. And yet, I've had people say to me, that communist Bernie Sanders, what is it?
Oh, my favorite expression is the lady is shouting, get the government's hands off my Medicare. Well, hello, that's where the Medicare comes from. People are, they like to live with contradictions, and they don't really make sense of them. Conspiracy theories come from nowhere. People vote their emotions and not their brains. That's part of politics. That's not all bad. You need to inspire emotion. Great politicians can't just be dry and just the facts. They need to lift people up and make them believe in things. But when you do it with lies and rumors and innuendos and false hopes, then you're misleading the public, and some politicians do that.
Do you think the Sanders campaign will have any lasting effect on our politics?
Well, he also, like Trump, tapped into this feeling of people who feel excluded by the elites. There is a problem in our country of a separation between rich and poor. I mean, compared to European countries, it's actually worse here than it is there, sort of surprisingly in a way. And this rich-poor gap, that's a bad thing. And we can't let that go on forever. So Sanders taps into that mood of, hey, something is wrong here where the people on Wall Street are getting rich, and my job just went to Mexico. Something is wrong with this picture. Something is wrong with that picture. And the political system has got to address that. I think Sanders was a flawed candidate in a lot of ways, although my grandfather was a socialist. I'm not. Nonetheless, somebody needs to be paying attention to that.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on City
Thanks,
Pulse.
Pearl.
And next week, we'll be back with an election postmortem with John Truscott and Kelly Rossman McKinney, among others. Senator Hertel and Senator Rick Jones are the others. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.